The winter of 1901 struck Utah with unprecedented ferocity. Snow piled against the windows of the Márquez homestead, a sturdy two-story structure standing alone against the vastness of the Wasatch. Range Manuel Márquez had purchased the property 3 years prior, moving his family from California after striking a modest fortune in the tail end of the gold rush. The home, built by a Mormon settler who had abandoned it following a family tragedy, came with 60 acres of workable land and a reputation that Manuel had dismissed as superstition. Sarah Márquez pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders as she descended the narrow wooden stairs into the cellar. The lantern in her hand cast dancing shadows across the earthen walls, illuminating the rows of preserved vegetables and fruits that would sustain the family through the winter. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a dampness that seemed out of place in the arid Utah climate. "Mama, do you need help?" Elena called from the top of the stairs. At 16, she was the eldest of the 3 Márquez children, and the most perceptive. She had noticed her mother's increasing reluctance to enter the cellar alone. "No, mihaiga. I'm fine," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the unease that had settled in her stomach. She refused to give credence to her fears, particularly in front of her children. Manuel already thought her imagination overactive. The cellar had been dug deep into the ground, its corners disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of her lantern. Sarah moved efficiently, selecting jars of pickled beans and dried apple slices. A sound like fingernails dragging across packed earth stopped her cold. She held her breath, straining to hear over the pounding of her heart. "Just the house settling," she whispered to herself, the words forming small clouds in the frigid air. As Sarah turned to leave, the light of her lantern caught something partially buried in the far corner of the cellar. She hesitated, then moved closer. The edge of a wooden box protruded from the dirt floor. It hadn't been there during her last visit to the cellar 3 days ago. Of this she was certain. With trembling fingers, Sarah brushed away the loose soil. The box was small, roughly the size of a cigar case, with intricate carvings that seemed to shift in the wavering light. A brass lock, green with age, secured its contents. Mama Elena called again, her voice tinged with concern. Sarah quickly covered the box with dirt again, an instinctive action she couldn't explain. "Coming, Elena?" That night, as wind howled around the eaves of the house and her family slept, Sarah lay awake beside her husband. She hadn't mentioned the box to Manuel. He would insist on digging it up, opening it, and something deep within Sarah warned against this. Yet the image of the box haunted her, its existence a splinter in her mind that refused to be ignored. The next morning, while Manuel took their son Michael to town for supplies and Elena helped their youngest, Catherine, with her reading lessons, Sarah returned to the cellar. The box remained where she had found it, though it seemed to have shifted slightly, more of its surface now exposed. This time Sarah dug it free entirely. The wood was not rotted as she would expect from something buried in the damp earth. Instead, it appeared polished, the carvings more distinct in the daylight that filtered through the small cellar window, symbols she didn't recognize, interwoven with what looked like faces twisted in anguish. The lock, she discovered, was not locked at all. It fell open at her touch. Sarah hesitated, her fingers lingering on the brass lock. A rational voice in her mind urged caution. This was someone else's property, perhaps a valuable heirloom hidden by the previous owner. Yet another part of her, the part that had felt the cellar's wrongness from the moment they moved in, wanted to reseal the box and bury it deeper than before. Before she could decide, footsteps sounded on the cellar stairs. "What have you found, my dear?" Manuel's voice carried a note of curiosity as he descended, earlier than expected from his trip to town. Sarah straightened, clutching the box to her chest before she could consider why she might want to hide it from her husband. "I'm not sure. It was buried in the corner." Manuel crossed the cellar in 3 long strides. His interest piqued. He had always possessed a collector's enthusiasm for historical artifacts, a passion that had only grown since their move to Utah. The region's rich tapestry of Native American, Mormon, and frontier history provided ample opportunity for such discoveries. Let me see, he took the box from her hands, examining the carvings with appreciative eyes. "Remarkable craftsmanship. These symbols, they don't appear to be Ute or Navajo. Perhaps Spanish colonial?" Sarah watched as her husband opened the box without the hesitation that had gripped her. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried herbs, lay a small leather journal and a tarnished silver pendant. Manuel lifted the pendant first. A disc the size of a silver dollar, it featured the same intricate symbols as the box, arranged around a central design that resembled a keyhole. "Fascinating," he murmured, turning it over in his palm. "We should leave it be, Manuel," Sarah said softly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "It was buried for a reason." Manuel laughed, the sound echoing oddly in the confined space. "Don't tell me you're becoming superstitious, Sarah. This is a historical find, nothing more. He tucked the pendant into his pocket and opened the journal. The pages were brittle but intact, filled with cramped handwriting. It's in English, dated 1873. Listen to this. I have secured the artifact as instructed, though I fear the consequences of bringing it to this place. The dreams have started again. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cellar's temperature. Please, Manuel. Put it back. Nonsense. This might explain what happened to the family that lived here before us. He closed the journal and placed it back in the box, keeping the pendant. I'll study this tonight after dinner. The rest of the day passed with an air of false normalcy. Sarah prepared a stew with the vegetables she'd collected from the cellar, though her appetite had vanished. Alina sensed her mother's disquiet and stayed close, helping with chores she normally avoided. Michael, at 12, was oblivious, excitedly telling Catherine about the new steam engine he'd seen in town. Manuel retired to his study after dinner, taking the box and its contents with him. Sarah busied herself with putting the younger children to bed, reading to Catherine until the 6-year-old's eyelids grew heavy. She checked on Michael, already asleep amid his collection of hand-carved wooden soldiers, before finding Elena in her room, brushing her long dark hair. "Mama, what's wrong?" Elena asked, meeting Sarah's eyes in the mirror. "You've been acting strange since this morning." Sarah hesitated, then sat on the edge of her daughter's bed. "Your father found something in the cellar. A box with ... items inside. I don't know why, but it frightens me." Elena set down her brush. "Is it like the sounds we hear at night? The scratching?" Sarah's breath caught. "You've heard it too? Why didn't you say anything?" "I thought it was mice," Elena replied, though her tone suggested she had suspected otherwise. "But sometimes it sounds like ... words. Whispers in Spanish, but not any Spanish I know." Mother and daughter sat in silence, the weight of shared unease hanging between them. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the windows in sharp staccato bursts. "Get some sleep," Sarah finally said, kissing Elena's forehead. "Everything will be fine," but as she closed her daughter's door, Sarah knew she had spoken a lie. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep resonance penetrating the walls of the Márquez home. Sarah lay awake beside Manuel, listening to his even breathing. Since coming to bed, he had not mentioned the journal or the pendant, and Sarah had not asked. A gulf of unspoken concerns stretched between them, wider than any in their 17 years of marriage. Sarah slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb her husband. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she made her way to Manuel's study, guided by a sliver of moonlight through the hallway window. The door was unlocked, unusual for Manuel, who valued his privacy. Inside, the study was cold, the fire having died hours ago. Sarah lit a small lamp and immediately saw the box open on Manuel's desk, the journal beside it. The pendant, however, was nowhere in sight. Pages of notes in Manuel's tight handwriting were scattered across the desktop, along with several books from his collection on Native American and Mormon history. Sarah picked up the journal, feeling its weight in her hands. She opened to the first page, the same entry Manuel had read aloud in the cellar. The handwriting belonged to Joseph Woodward, the original owner of their home. She turned the page. March 18, 1873. The dreams grow worse. I see a darkness spreading from the cellar, consuming everything it touches. Elizabeth insists we should leave, but where would we go? This land is our future, our children's inheritance. I cannot abandon it over nightmares. March 25, 1873. Found Samuel sleepwalking again last night. The boy was attempting to carry the artifact to the cellar. When I woke him, he spoke in a language I did not recognize. Elizabeth is packing our belongings tomorrow. I have agreed to send her and the children to her sister's home in Colorado until I can resolve this matter. The entries continued, detailing Joseph's deteriorating mental state after his family's departure. He wrote of voices emerging from the cellar walls, of symbols appearing in the frost on the windows each morning, identical to those on the pendant. The final entry, dated June 2, 1873, was barely legible, the handwriting erratic. It hungers, not for flesh, but for something deeper. I have failed. May God forgive me for what I have done. Sarah closed the journal, her hands shaking. The Mormon family's tragedy that Manuel had mentioned when they purchased the property suddenly took on a more sinister aspect. She had assumed a natural death or financial ruin had driven them away. Now she wondered if Joseph Woodward still lay somewhere within these walls, a victim of whatever he had unearthed. A soft scratching sound drew Sarah's attention to the study door. It stood slightly ajar, though she was certain she had closed it behind her. Beyond the threshold, the hallway stretched in darkness. "Elena," Sarah whispered, hoping her daughter had also wakened. No response came. The scratching continued, not from the hallway but from within the study walls. Sarah turned slowly, following the sound as it circled the room. like something moving within the very framework of the house. It stopped directly behind Manuel's desk chair. The lamp flickered, its light dimming momentarily. When it stabilized, Sarah noticed something on the chair that hadn't been there before: the silver pendant, its symbol seeming to absorb the lamplight rather than reflect it. Sarah approached cautiously. The pendant lay on the seat where Manuel would have sat, the keyhole design at its center more prominent than she remembered. As she reached for it, the scratching resumed, faster, more urgent, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Her fingers closed around the cold metal and the scratching stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Sarah heard a whisper, so close it might have been her own thought. "Lavalo abajo, take it below." Sarah jerked her hand away from the pendant as if burned. She backed toward the door, unwilling to turn away from the desk. The lamp went out, plunging the study into darkness. In the hallway, a floorboard creaked. Heavy footsteps approached the study door. "Manuel," Sarah called, her voice thin with fear. The door swung open fully. A figure stood silhouetted against the faint moonlight from the hall window. It was Manuel's height and build, but something in its stance, a rigidity, an unnaturalness, told Sarah that whatever stood before her was not her husband. "Mi amor," it said in Manuel's voice, though the inflection was wrong, the Spanish too formal, too precise. "Why are you awake at this hour?" Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as she stared at the figure in the doorway. Though it was draped in shadows, she could make out Manuel's features, his broad shoulders, the slight stoop from years bending over ledgers and historical texts. Yet something fundamental was missing, as if the essence of her husband had been hollowed out, replaced with something that only approximated humanity. "I couldn't sleep," she managed, striving to keep her voice steady. "The storm, ... The figure that was not quite Manuel tilted its head, the movement too fluid, too calculated. "The storm passed hours ago, mi amor. Come back to bed." It extended a hand toward her. In the dim light, Sarah saw the silver pendant dangling from its fingers, the same pendant she had just seen on the chair that she had not picked up. "Where did you get that?" she asked, nodding toward the pendant. The figure looked down as if surprised to find the object in its possession. "This? It has always been mine." The voice was Manuel's, but the cadence was wrong, each word carefully enunciated as if English were a recently acquired skill. Sarah edged along the wall, putting the desk between herself and the figure. "What have you done with Manuel?" A smile spread across the face that belonged to her husband, a smile she had never seen before, too wide, the corners of his mouth stretching unnaturally. "I am Manuel Márquez, your husband, the father of your children." The mention of her children sent a jolt of protective fury through Sarah. "No," she said firmly. "You are not." For a moment, the pretense slipped. The figure's posture changed, becoming more angular, less human. The smile remained fixed, but the eyes, Manuel's warm brown eyes, darkened until they appeared as empty sockets in the moonlight. "Perspicacia," it said, the Spanish word for perceptive, sliding from its lips like oil on water. "Most do not notice until it is far too late." Sarah's mind raced. Her children slept upstairs, unaware of the danger. Manuel, the real Manuel, had to be somewhere. The cellar, she realized with dreadful certainty. Whatever had taken his form wanted her to go there too. "What do you want?" she asked, buying time as she gauged the distance to the door. The figure twirled the pendant between its fingers, to complete what was started long ago. The woodwords were ... uncooperative. "Your husband shows more promise." "The journal," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "Joseph Woodward buried the pendant to contain you." "Contain?" The thing wearing Manuel's face laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "He invited me, called me through the artifact, seeking knowledge beyond his rightful grasp." As your husband did tonight, Sarah thought of Manuel's fascination with the pendant, his dismissal of her concerns. His passion for historical artifacts had always bordered on obsession, a quality she had once found endearing. "What are you?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. "I am very old," it replied simply. "I have worn many names and many forms throughout the centuries. The Spanish missionaries who first encountered me called me El Cujabet, entre paredes, the one who dwells between walls." As it spoke, Sarah noticed a subtle change in the room. The scratching had returned, not from within the walls, but from above, from the ceiling. Dust sifted down as something moved in the space between floors. Something heading toward her children's rooms. "No!" Sarah lunged forward, attempting to push past the creature that looked like her husband. It moved with impossible speed, blocking her path. Up close, the illusion was less convincing. Manuel's skin appeared waxy, his eyes like glass beads, reflecting nothing. "Elo son mio Sahora," it hissed, "they are mine now." Sarah's hand closed around the letter opener on Manuel's desk, a silver implement with a pointed tip. Without hesitation, she drove it into the creature's chest, where Manuel's heart should be. The thing wearing her husband's face looked down at the wound with mild curiosity. No blood flowed. Instead, the area around the letter opener darkened, as if the flesh were turning to ash from the inside. It smiled that terrible smile again. Iron would have been more effective, but silver will suffice for a temporary inconvenience. The figure stumbled backward, the pendant slipping from its grasp and falling to the floor with a metallic ring. Sarah seized her opportunity, darting past it into the hallway and toward the stairs. "Elena! Michael! Catherine!" she screamed, taking the steps 2 at a time. Behind her, she heard the thing that was not Manuel call after her, its voice distorting, losing its human quality. "No puedes escapar de lo que ya está adentro. You cannot escape what is already inside." Sarah burst into Elena's room first, finding her daughter already awake, sitting rigidly on the edge of her bed. The teenager's eyes were wide, fixed on the corner of the ceiling where the wallpaper bulged outward as if something pressed against it from within. "Mama," Elena whispered, "there's something in the walls." Sarah grabbed her daughter's hand, pulling her to her feet. "We need to get Michael and Catherine. Now." They rushed to Michael's room across the hall. The boy was not in his bed. A trail of muddy footprints led from his window, which stood open despite the freezing night air, to the hallway. "He was sleepwalking," Elena said, her voice shaking. "Like in the journal." Sarah felt a wave of dread. "How do you know about the journal?" "I heard you and Papa arguing earlier. I went to his study after everyone was asleep. I read it." Elena clutched her mother's arm. "Mama, where's Papa now?" "That's not your father downstairs," Sarah said grimly. "We need to find Michael and Catherine, then get out of this house." They found Catherine still asleep in her bed, her small face peaceful amidst the chaos unfolding around her. Sarah lifted her youngest child, wrapping her in a blanket. The girl stirred but didn't wake fully, mumbling something about the man in the cellar. The scratching sounds intensified, converging from all directions toward the hallway where they stood. The wallpaper rippled like water disturbed by an underwater current. The back stairs, Sarah decided, guiding Elena toward the narrow servants' staircase at the end of the hall. It would bypass the main staircase where the thing wearing Manuel's face had last been seen. As they descended, Sarah formulated a desperate plan. They needed to find Michael and the real Manuel, then escape the property entirely. But first, she needed the pendant, the source of whatever evil had infiltrated their home. The back stairs emptied into the kitchen. They crept through the darkened room, Sarah leading with Catherine in her arms, Elena following close behind. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see fresh footprints in the snow leading toward the cellar's exterior entrance, small footprints that could only belong to Michael. "He's in the cellar," Sarah whispered. "We can't go in there," Elena protested. "We can't leave him." Sarah handed Catherine to her eldest daughter. "Take your sister to the Johnsons' farm. It's only 2 miles down the road." Elena shook her head vehemently. "I won't leave you and Michael." "You must," Sarah insisted. "Catherine needs you. I'll find Michael and your father. We'll follow as soon as we can." After a moment's hesitation, Elena nodded. Sarah watched as her daughter slipped out the back door, Catherine bundled against her chest, and disappeared into the night. Alone now, Sarah moved through the house toward Manuel's study. She needed the pendant, not to use it, but to bury it far deeper than Joseph Woodward ever had. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, the house seeming to track her movements. The study door stood open, the room empty. The silver pendant lay where it had fallen, gleaming in a shaft of moonlight. Sarah approached cautiously, removing a handkerchief from her pocket. She used it to pick up the pendant, careful not to let the metal touch her skin. As she straightened, a voice spoke from the doorway, Michael's voice, but with the same wrong inflection she had heard from the thing impersonating Manuel. "Mama, why did you send Elena and Catherine away?" The boy stood unnaturally still, his nightshirt stained with earth from the cellar. Sarah clutched the pendant through the handkerchief, backing away. "You're not my son." The thing wearing Michael's face smiled, that same too-wide smile. "No longer. But I can wear many faces at once when necessary. Your husband taught me that trick tonight. Where is Michael? Where is Manuel?" Sarah demanded. Where all curious souls eventually find themselves face to face with truth. The boy's body moved forward with jerky, puppet-like motions. "The cellar awaits you as well, Sarah Márquez." Sarah bolted past the thing wearing her son's form, into the hallway, toward the kitchen and the exterior cellar entrance. If Manuel and the real Michael were still alive, that's where they would be. And if they weren't, she refused to complete the thought. Outside, the night air bit at her skin as she followed the footprints in the snow to the cellar doors. They stood open, revealing a rectangle of absolute darkness below. Sarah hesitated at the threshold, the pendant heavy in her hand. From within the cellar, a voice called out, Manuel's voice, filled with pain and desperation. "Sarah, Help us. Sarah took a deep breath and descended into the darkness. The cellar air hung thick and stagnant, carrying a metallic scent that reminded Sarah of blood. Her lantern, hastily grabbed from the kitchen, cast a weak circle of light that barely penetrated the oppressive blackness. The familiar rows of preserves and root vegetables had been pushed aside, revealing a portion of the earthen floor that had been excavated, exposing what appeared to be ancient stonework beneath a floor or foundation that predated the homestead by centuries. "Manuel?" Sarah called, her voice absorbed by the darkness. "Michael?" Muffled sound drew her attention to the far corner, the same corner where she had discovered the box. The light of her lantern revealed Manuel and Michael huddled together, bound with what looked like tendrils of earth that had somehow animated, wrapping around their limbs and torsos. Both were conscious, their eyes wide with terror. "Sarah," Manuel gasped, his voice hoarse. "Run! Get the children and run!" Sarah rushed to them, setting down the lantern. "Alina has taken Catherine to the Johnsons. I came back for you and Michael." She began clawing at the earthen bindings, but they were solid as rope and seemed to tighten with her efforts. Michael whimpered, his small face streaked with tears and dirt. "Mama had made me walk here. I couldn't stop myself. I know, mijijo. It wasn't your fault." Sarah stroked his hair, then turned to Manuel. "What happened? What is this thing?" Manuel's face was haggard, his normally robust complexion ashen. I read the journal, then examined the pendant. Hey, I must have fallen asleep at my desk. When I awoke, I was ... com to ... talk to come to the cellar. I fought it, Sarah. I swear I fought it with every ounce of my will, but it was too strong. "The pendant," Sarah said, drawing the handkerchief-wrapped object from her pocket. "This is the source of its power." Manuel nodded weakly. "Joseph Woodward found it while digging the cellar. The journal suggests it's much older than this land settlement, perhaps placed here by Spanish explorers, or even earlier civilizations." "What does it want?" Sarah asked, still working at the earthen bonds. "To spread," Manuel replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It feeds on fear and pain, growing stronger with each new host it claims. The journal describes how it consumed Woodward's mind piece by piece until he was merely a shell for its consciousness." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cellar's temperature. "And now it's wearing your face. And Michael's. Not just our faces," Manuel said grimly. "Pieces of our minds, our memories. It's learning from us, becoming more convincing in its mimicry." The air in the cellar shifted, growing colder. The lantern flame flickered, nearly extinguishing before stabilizing again. Sarah felt, rather than heard, a presence behind her. "Such a touching family reunion," said three voices in unison. Sarah turned slowly. At the foot of the cellar stairs stood three figures, perfect replicas of Manuel, Michael, and herself. The sight of her own face, animated by something alien and malevolent, sent a wave of revulsion through Sarah. "You see now why the Woodwards failed me." The three spoke as one. Their movements synchronized like marionettes controlled by the same hand. A complete set is so much more effective. "What do you want from us?" Sarah demanded, shifting to place herself between the entities and her family. The three figures tilted their heads in identical bird-like motions. "Want? I want what all imprisoned things desire. Freedom. Expansion." The thing wearing Sarah's face stepped forward. "For centuries I was bound to this place, able to reach only those who ventured into my domain. The pendant was my first extension beyond these walls. Now, I have you, a family of faces to wear, memories to mine, lives to inhabit. We'll fight you," Sarah said, though fear threatened to choke her words. "Joseph Woodward fought," her doppelganger replied with a cold smile. "His resistance provided ... sustenance ... for nearly 3 decades. Sarah's mind raced. If the pendant was the source of the entity's power, perhaps destroying it would weaken or banish the creature. But how? The silver had withstood burial in the damp earth without tarnishing. It wouldn't melt in any ordinary fire. Behind her, Manuel seemed to follow her thoughts. "The box," he whispered urgently. "The journal mentioned consecrated wood cedar from Lebanon, blessed by Spanish priests. It was meant to contain the pendant's influence." The three figures hissed in unison, their faces contorting with anger. "Enough whispers." They moved forward as one, the earthen floor rippling beneath their feet like water. Sarah clutched the pendant through the handkerchief, feeling its unnatural coldness even through the fabric. A desperate plan formed in her mind, not to destroy the pendant, but to return it to its prison. "The box," she said to Manuel. "Where is it?" "On my desk," he replied. "But it won't hold without the proper ritual." "The journal—" "We don't have time for rituals," Sarah interrupted, pulling a small pocket knife from her dress. Before the advancing entities could reach them, she sliced through her palm, letting blood drip onto the handkerchief-wrapped pendant. The effect was immediate. The three figures froze, their synchronized movements faltering. The air in the cellar became charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Blood binds," Sarah said, remembering a phrase from the journal. "Blood contains." The entities screamed, a sound no human throat could produce, as the earthen floor beneath them began to tremble. Cracks appeared in the ancient stonework, widening into fissures from which a pale mist emerged. "Run," Sarah urged, helping Manuel and Michael to their feet as the earthen bonds began to crumble. Upstairs now. They scrambled toward the cellar stairs, the structure of the cellar itself seeming to collapse around them. Behind them, the three doppelgangers melted like wax figures in a fire, their features running together into formless masses that sank into the fractured stone floor. Sarah clutched the bloodied pendant as they reached the main floor of the house, slamming the cellar door behind them. The entire homestead shook, picture frames crashing from walls, furniture sliding across floors as if pushed by invisible hands. "We need to get out," Manuel shouted over the cacophony, lifting Michael into his arms. They fled through the front door into the snow-covered yard, watching in horror and awe as the Márquez homestead seemed to fold in on itself, the structure groaning like a living thing in its death throes. The ground beneath the house sank, creating a depression that swallowed the cellar and much of the first floor. When the tremors finally subsided, all that remained was a partial shell of the upper story, jutting from a newly formed crater like the rib cage of some massive, prehistoric creature. In Sarah's hand, the pendant had grown hot, the symbols on its surface glowing with a dull red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "It's still alive," she whispered. Dawn broke over the ruins of the Márquez homestead, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold. Sarah, Manuel, and Michael stood huddled together at a safe distance, watching as the first rays of sunlight illuminated what remained of their home. The pendant in Sarah's hand had cooled, its symbols no longer glowing, but she could still feel a subtle vibration emanating from the silver disc, like the purr of a sleeping beast. "We need to find Elena and Catherine," Manuel said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and cold. "Then we must leave this place. Forever." Sarah nodded, unable to tear her gaze from the ruined homestead. "What about this?" she asked, holding up the pendant. "We can't simply take it with us, and I fear burying it again would only delay the inevitable." "We'll find a way to destroy it," Manuel promised, though uncertainty shadowed his face. "There must be someone who understands these things better than we do." Michael, who had remained silent since their escape, suddenly spoke up. "It's still there, isn't it? Under the house." Waiting, Sarah exchanged a worried glance with Manuel. The boy's perception was unnervingly accurate. "Yes," she admitted, "but it's weakened. Contained for now." "It knows us now," Michael continued, his young voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years. "We'll follow the pendant. Follow us." Manuel placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "We won't let it hurt you or your sisters again." They set out toward the Johnson farm, trudging through knee-deep snow. The pendant, wrapped again in Sarah's blood-stained handkerchief, was secured in Manuel's inside pocket. Though no one spoke of it, each felt the weight of its presence, a malevolent eye watching their every step. The Johnson farm appeared on the horizon like a mirage promise of warmth and safety. Smoke rose from the chimney and figures moved about the yard, preparing for the day's work. As they approached, the front door burst open, and Elena ran toward them, her face alight with relief. "Mama, Papa," she cried, embracing them fiercely. We saw the house from here. We thought you were—" She couldn't finish the sentence, tears choking her words. "We're safe, mihega," Sarah assured her, though the pendant in Manuel's pocket seemed to grow heavier at the lie. Catherine emerged from the farmhouse, bundled in borrowed clothes too large for her small frame. Her face lit up at the sight of her family, whole and alive despite the night's horrors. Behind her stood Thomas Johnson, a look of concern etched on his weathered face. "Márquez," the farmer called, "what in God's name happened to your place?" Manuel hesitated, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. "A structural failure," he finally said. "The cellar collapsed, taking most of the house with it." Johnson shook his head in disbelief. "Never did trust that old Woodward place. Built on bad ground, if you ask me. You and your family are welcome here until you sort things out." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward their neighbor, even as she recognized the impossibility of staying. The pendant and whatever remained of the entity beneath their ruined home-made proximity to others too dangerous. "Thank you, Thomas," Manuel replied, "but we'll be moving on. I have a cousin in Colorado who can take us in until we decide what to do next." Inside the Johnson home, over a breakfast none of the Márquez family could eat, Manuel outlined their plan in hushed tones. They would take the train to Denver that very day, leaving Utah and its horrors behind. There they would seek out experts who might know how to destroy the pendant permanently. The university has a department of antiquities, he explained, stirring a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Someone there might recognize the symbols, understand what we're dealing with. Alina, who sat close to Sarah as if afraid to let her mother out of her sight, asked the question they'd all been avoiding. What if it can't be destroyed? A heavy silence fell over the family. It was Catherine, innocent in her wisdom, who finally broke it. The scratching stopped when Mama bled on it, she said matter-of-factly. Maybe it needs more blood to go away forever. Sarah stared at her youngest child, chilled by the implication. Had Catherine somehow intuited a truth about the pendant's nature? Or had the entity's influence reached her as well, planting ideas that would lead to further sacrifice? No more blood, Sarah said firmly. We'll find another way. The journey to the train station was tense, each member of the family jumping at shadows, startling at normal sounds. The pendant remained in Manuel's pocket, a cold weight against his chest that seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile. At the station, while Manuel purchased tickets, Sarah noticed Michael staring intently at a man across the platform, a tall figure in a black coat who seemed oddly familiar despite being a stranger. When the man turned, Sarah caught a glimpse of his face and felt her blood freeze. Though the features were different, the expression, that calculated, observant look, was identical to the one she had seen on the face of the thing that had worn her husband's appearance. Manuel, she whispered urgently when he returned. We're not alone. Manuel followed her gaze to the man in the black coat, who now watched them openly, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. All aboard for Denver, called the conductor, breaking the moment. The Márquez family hurried onto the train, selecting a compartment as far from the mysterious man as possible. As the train lurched into motion, Sarah gazed out the window at the Utah landscape sliding away. In the distance, she could just make out the silhouette of the Wasatch Range, and nestled among the foothills, the dark depression that had once been their home. The pendant pulsed once in Manuel's pocket, a surge of cold that made him gasp. Outside the compartment door, footsteps approached, hurried, deliberate. Sarah reached for Manuel's hand. It's beginning again, isn't it? Before he could answer, the compartment door slid open. The door revealed not the man in the black coat, but a train attendant, a young woman with rosy cheeks and a practiced smile. Tickets, please, she said cheerfully, extending her hand. Manuel fumbled in his jacket, producing the tickets with visible relief. The attendant punched them efficiently, then hesitated, her eyes lingering on each family member in turn. You folks all right? Look like you've seen a ghost. Her tone was light, but her gaze was sharp, assessing. Just tired, Sarah replied with a forced smile. It's been a long night. The attendant nodded, seemingly satisfied with the explanation. Dining car opens in an hour if you're hungry. We'll reach Grand Junction by nightfall. She departed, sliding the compartment door closed behind her. Clena released a breath she had been holding. I thought it was him, the man from the platform. So did I, Sarah admitted, settling back into her seat. Catherine had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from the ordeal. Michael sat by the window, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape, unnaturally still for a boy his age. Manuel withdrew a small notebook from his bag, not Joseph Woodward's journal, which had been lost in the collapse, but his own ledger, now repurposed. We need to record everything we remember about the pendant, the entity, the journal's contents. Details might be important. While Manuel wrote and the children dozed, Sarah kept watch, her eyes constantly moving between the compartment door and the corridor beyond. The man in the black coat had not reappeared, but she felt his presence on the train as surely as she felt the pendant's malevolent energy. Hours passed. The landscape outside transformed from the stark mountains of Utah to the mesas and canyons of western Colorado. The rocking motion of the train lulled even Sarah into a fitful doze, her dreams filled with scratching sounds and whispering voices. She woke with a start as the train lurched, brakes squealing. Catherine stirred against her shoulder, and Elena straightened in her seat. What's happening? Lena asked, peering out the window at a small station platform illuminated by gas lamps in the gathering dusk. Grand Junction, Manuel replied, checking his pocket watch. Right on schedule. Sarah scanned the platform, watching as passengers disembarked and others waited to board. Among them stood the man in the black coat, his gaze fixed directly on their compartment window. This time there was no mistaking the expression on his face, a knowing smile that made Sarah's skin crawl. He's still following us, she whispered. Manuel followed her gaze, his face hardening. I'll speak with the conductor. Have him removed at the next stop. No, Sarah said firmly, gripping his arm. Don't draw attention. Don't engage. That's what it wants. The train departed Grand Junction with the man in the black coat now aboard, though he had not passed their compartment. The pendant in Manuel's pocket remained cold but quiescent, as if waiting. Night fell fully as the train climbed into the Rocky Mountains. Catherine and Michael had fallen asleep again, huddled together on one bench seat. Elena fought to keep her eyes open, her head nodding forward only to jerk upright again with stubborn determination. "Sleep, mihija," Sarah urged gently. "I'll keep watch." Elena shook her head. "I'm afraid to dream, Mama. I'm afraid of what I might see." Sarah understood her daughter's fear all too well. "Then let's talk. Tell me what you read in the journal." Elena hesitated, glancing at her sleeping siblings. "There was more than Papa told you. Woodward didn't just find the pendant. He was searching for it." Sarah felt a chill. "What do you mean?" "The first entries. They described a dream Woodward had been having for years. A voice calling to him from beneath the earth, promising knowledge, power." Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. "He came to Utah because the voice told him where to dig." Manuel, who had been staring out the window at the darkness beyond, turned sharply. "That wasn't in the journal I read. The first pages were stuck together," Elena explained. "I separated them carefully. Woodward knew what he was looking for." Only his eyes betrayed his true nature, black as coal without whites or pupils. "The child is perceptive," he said in a voice that seemed to bypass their ears and resonate directly in their minds. Joseph Woodward was indeed called, as was Manuel Márquez. As are so many who hunger for what lies beyond their understanding. Manuel rose to his feet, placing himself between the stranger and his family. "What do you want from us?" The man smiled. A normal smile, yet somehow more terrifying than the inhuman rictus the entity had worn in Manuel's form. "Want? I want nothing from you, Manuel Márquez. You have already given me what I need, a bridge from that place to this one." He extended his hand, palm up. "The pendant, if you please. Its purpose is fulfilled, but it remains sentimental to me." "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, even as she feared the answer. The man's eyes shifted to her, black orbs that seemed to absorb the compartment's lamplight. "I have worn many names throughout human history. The Sumerians called me Pazuzu. The Greeks knew me as Moros. The Navajo as Yenod Lushi. I prefer to remain unnamed." Sarah felt Michael stir beside her, waking from his sleep. The boy stared at the man with an expression not of fear, but recognition. "You're what was under our house," Michael said softly. "In the walls." The man inclined his head slightly. "A fragment of myself, yes, imprisoned by those who feared knowledge. But fragments have a way of growing, given time and suitable vessels." Manuel's hand moved to his pocket where the pendant lay. "If I give you this, will you leave my family in peace?" "Manuel, no," Sarah protested. The man's smile widened. "An interesting proposal, but unnecessary. What was once contained is now free. The pendant is merely a souvenir of my rebirth." As he spoke, the train entered a tunnel, plunging the compartment into momentary darkness. When the lamplight returned, the man was gone, but the door remained open, swaying with the train's motion. Manuel rushed to the corridor, looking both ways, but found it empty. He returned, his face ashen, and withdrew the pendant from his pocket. The silver disc was now tarnished black, its symbols faded to near invisibility. "It's just metal now," he said wonderingly. "Whatever power it had is gone." Sarah wasn't comforted. "If the pendant was merely a conduit, then what came through is now free," Elena finished, voicing what they all feared. The remainder of the journey passed in tense silence. The man in the black coat did not reappear, though each family member felt his presence lingering just beyond their perception in the shadows between train cars, in the reflections on window glass, in the faces of passing strangers who seemed to watch them with too keen interest. They arrived in Denver as dawn broke over the city, bathing the buildings in golden light. The Márquez family disembarked, exhausted but intact, carrying with them an empty pendant and a burden of knowledge no family should bear. As they stood on the platform deciding their next move, Catherine tugged on Sarah's sleeve, pointing to a newspaper stand nearby. The headline, printed in bold black letters, caught Sarah's attention. Mysterious collapse claims Utah Homestead former Woodward property continues. Tragic legacy. Beneath the headline was a photograph of their ruined homeland standing amid the rubble. Barely discernible in the grainy image, but unmistakable to Sarah's eyes, was the silhouette of a tall man in a black coat. Denver greeted the Márquez family with indifferent bustle, the city's residents hurrying about their morning routines, oblivious to the 5 newcomers who carried knowledge of horrors beyond human understanding. Manuel's cousin Alejandro Vasquez met them at the station, a robust man with Manuel's same broad shoulders and kind eyes, though his face showed concern at their haggard appearance. Primo Alejandro embraced Manuel warmly before turning to the rest of the family. "Sarah, niños, you look exhausted. Come, I have rooms prepared for you at my home." Alejandro's carriage transported them through Denver's streets to a handsome brownstone in a respectable neighborhood. Inside, his wife Maria fussed over the children, preparing hot chocolate and fresh bread while sending servants to ready baths and beds. "You'll tell us what happened when you're rested," she insisted, brushing aside Manuel's attempts at explanation. Some troubles are better faced in daylight after a good sleep. Sarah wanted to protest, to warn these kind relatives of the danger that might have followed them, but exhaustion clouded her thoughts. The pendant, now just a tarnished piece of metal, remained in Manuel's pocket, but the entity it had unleashed was loose in the world. How could they possibly explain that to Alejandro and Maria? The family was separated into guest rooms, Manuel and Sarah in one, the girls in another, and Michael given a small room that had belonged to Alejandro's son, now grown and married. As Sarah sank into a clean feather bed beside her husband, she fought against the pull of sleep. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "We're putting them in danger." Manuel took her hand, his grip firm despite his obvious fatigue. "One night, mi amor. We need rest to think clearly. Tomorrow we'll decide our next steps." Despite her fears, Sarah's body surrendered to exhaustion, pulling her into a deep slumber free of dreams, a small mercy she hadn't expected. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the smell of coffee and cooking bacon wafting from below. For a disorienting moment, Sarah thought she was back in their Utah home before the cellar and its secrets had destroyed everything. Reality returned swiftly, bringing with it renewed dread. Downstairs, the children were already at the breakfast table, Catherine chattering animatedly with Maria while Elena watched. Michael with the same worried vigilance Sarah had felt since their escape. The boy ate silently, his eyes constantly drifting to the windows as if expecting to see a familiar tall figure watching from the street. Alejandro folded his newspaper as Manuel and Sarah entered the dining room. "I've taken the liberty of contacting Professor William Thornton at the university," he announced. A brilliant man. He specializes in antiquities and folklore. If anyone can make sense of this pendant you mentioned in your telegram, it would be him." Sarah exchanged a glance with Manuel. They hadn't told Alejandro the full story, only that they had found an unusual artifact that might have historical significance, and that their house had suffered a structural collapse forcing their relocation. "That's very thoughtful," Manuel replied carefully. "When can we meet him?" "This afternoon," Alejandro said. "He was quite intrigued by my description. Said something about Spanish colonial relics being rare this far north." After breakfast, while the children remained under Maria's watchful eye, Manuel and Sarah retreated to the garden to speak privately. "We can't tell Professor Thornton everything," Sarah said, watching a hummingbird dart among flowering shrubs, a scene of such peaceful normalcy it seemed almost cruel in contrast to their circumstances. "He'll think we're insane." Manuel nodded, absently touching his pocket where the pendant rested. "We'll show him the artifact, ask about the symbols. Perhaps there's literature on similar findings, historical accounts that might guide us." "And if there's nothing?" Sarah asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since Denver. "If what we encountered is beyond academic understanding?" Manuel had no answer, and the silence between them stretched uncomfortably until it was broken by the garden gate swinging open. Elena stepped through, her face tight with worry. "It's Michael," she said without preamble. "He's drawing the symbols all over his room." They found Michael seated cross-legged on the floor of his borrowed bedroom, surrounded by papers covered in precise renderings of the symbols from the pendant. The boy looked up as they entered, his expression eerily calm. "I remember them all," he said simply. "They speak to me in my dreams." Sarah knelt beside her son, gathering the drawings with trembling hands. "Michael, these symbols are dangerous. We left them behind for a reason. The boy shook his head. We didn't leave anything behind, Mama. It's with us now, inside us. He tapped his temple meaningfully. It shows me things. People from long ago who found the pendant. What happened to them? Manuel exchanged an alarmed glance with Sarah. What people, son? First the Indians, Michael said, his voice taking on a strange cadence that wasn't his own. Then the Spanish priests who tried to lock it away. Then the Mormons. Now us. His eyes, normally warm brown like his father's, seemed darker, deeper. It's always the same pattern. Discovery. Obsession. Destruction. Sarah pulled Michael to his feet, cupping his face in her hands. Listen to me. Whatever is showing you these things, whatever is speaking to you, it is not your friend. It wants something from us. From you. I know, Michael replied with disturbing composure. It wants to be remembered. The meeting with Professor Thornton that afternoon did little to ease the family's growing sense of dread. The academica, thin, energetic man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a meticulously trimmed beard, examined the tarnished pendant with scholarly enthusiasm, oblivious to the tension radiating from the Márquez family. Extraordinary craftsmanship, he murmured, studying the faded symbols through a magnifying glass in his university office. The design elements suggest Iberian influence, but the symbolic language is unlike anything in established records. Where did you say you found this? In our cellar, Manuel replied simply. In Utah. Thornton raised an eyebrow. Quite far from any known Spanish settlements of the era. Though there are accounts of isolated expeditions venturing north, double quotes, he trailed off, distracted by a particular symbol. This recurring motif, what appears to be a doorway or portal, appears in several pre-Columbian artifacts. A universal symbol representing transition between worlds. Sarah felt a chill at the professor's unwitting accuracy. Is there any record of unusual events associated with similar artifacts? Thornton chuckled. My dear Mrs. Márquez, all ancient artifacts accumulate legends and superstitions. The more mysterious their origin, the more elaborate the tales. He set down the magnifying glass. I would very much like to study this further. Perhaps you would consider donating it to the university collection? Manuel hesitated, then nodded slowly. I believe that would be for the best. As they prepared to leave, Thornton suddenly snapped his fingers. I nearly forgot. There's someone you really must meet. A colleague of mine specializes in comparative mythology, particularly stories of entities that cross between worlds. She has an impressive collection of accounts that might interest you. He scribbled a name and address on a card. Dr. Elizabeth Woodward. No appointment necessary. She keeps open office hours on Thursdays. Sarah froze. Woodward? Yes, Thornton confirmed. Any relation to the Woodwards of Utah? I believe she mentioned family property there once. Outside the university, Manuel studied the professor's card with a troubled expression. It can't be coincidence. Elizabeth Woodward, Sarah whispered. Joseph's wife, the one who fled with their children. That's impossible, Manuel countered. That was nearly 30 years ago. This woman would have to be. We need to see her, Sarah interrupted. Now. The address led them to a modest home near the university campus. A brass plaque beside the door read, Dr. E. Woodward, Department of Anthropology. Manuel knocked, and moments later the door was opened by an elderly woman with sharp blue eyes and silver hair pulled into a severe bun. Yes? She asked, her gaze moving between Manuel and Sarah with undisguised suspicion. Dr. Woodward, Manuel began. Professor Thornton suggested we consult with you about the pendant, she finished for him, her expression hardening. You found it. It wasn't a question. Sarah stepped forward. You're Joseph Woodward's wife. The woman's composure faltered briefly before she regained control. Widow, she corrected. Come inside, quickly. We haven't much time. Elizabeth Woodward's parlor was crowded with books, artifacts, and maps pinned to every available surface. She moved with surprising agility for her age, clearing space on a settee for her visitors. I've spent my life tracking it, she said without preamble. Gathering accounts, following its path through history. I knew someday someone would release it again. Release what, exactly? Manuel asked. What is this entity? Elizabeth sank into an armchair, suddenly looking every one of her years. It has no true name in human language. The closest translation from the Navajo would be the hunger that walks between worlds. It feeds on human obsession, using objects of power like the pendant as anchors to our reality. It's free now, Sarah said quietly. The pendant is empty. Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features. Then God help us all. Joseph gave his life trying to contain it. Our son, Manuel, began hesitantly. It speaks to him, shows him things. It's chosen him, Elizabeth said grimly, as it chose Joseph, as it has chosen countless others throughout history. It needs human vessels to spread its influence. Sarah felt a surge of protective fury. How do we stop it? Elizabeth rose, moving to a glass-fronted cabinet. From within, she withdrew a leather-bound volume similar to her husband's journal. This contains everything I've learned, accounts from survivors, ritual practices that have temporarily contained it, historical patterns of its manifestation. She pressed the book into Sarah's hands. There is no permanent solution, only temporary measures. It cannot be destroyed, only contained until it finds a new path into our world. Then what hope do we have? Manuel asked, despair evident in his voice. Elizabeth's gaze hardened. Hope? None. But we have purpose. My husband sacrificed everything to imprison it beneath our home. Now that task falls to your family. Outside, the skies had darkened with gathering storm clouds. As lightning flashed, Sarah caught a glimpse of a tall figure standing across the street, watching Elizabeth Woodward's home with unnatural stillness. The entity had found them again. The storm broke with sudden violence as the Márquez family hurried back to Alejandro's brownstone. Elizabeth Woodward's journal clutched protectively beneath Sarah's coat. Lightning split the sky in jagged patterns reminiscent of the pendant's symbols. Thunder following in explosive peals that seemed to shake the very foundations of Denver. It knows, Michael said suddenly as they rushed up the front steps. It knows she gave us the book. Inside they found Alejandro and Maria in the parlor with Elena and Catherine, the atmosphere tense with unspoken concerns. Maria rose as they entered, her normally warm features tight with worry. There was a man asking for you, she said without preamble, tall, well-dressed. He said he was an associate from Utah. Manuel and Sarah exchanged alarmed glances. What did you tell him? Manuel asked. That you were out, Alejandro answered, his expression troubled. He left this. He handed Manuel a calling card, blank except for a single symbol inked onto its surface, the same keyhole design that had formed the center of the pendant. Catherine, who had been unusually quiet, pointed toward the window. He's still out there, watching. All eyes turned to the window where, through the curtains and sheets of rain, a dark figure could be seen standing beneath a street lamp. As they watched, lightning illuminated the street, revealing the man's face, unremarkable except for eyes that reflected the light like a predator's. We've put you in danger, Sarah said to Alejandro and Maria. Letters, we need to leave immediately. Nonsense, Alejandro replied firmly. Whatever trouble follows you, we face it together. We are family. Manuel placed a hand on his cousin's shoulder. This isn't ordinary trouble, Primo. You can't fight it with courage or guns. Then explain it to us, Maria insisted. No more half-truths. Over the next hour, as the storm raged outside and the man beneath the street lamp maintained his vigil, the Márquez family revealed the full horror of their experience in Utah. Elizabeth Woodward's journal provided additional context, centuries of encounters with the entity, its pattern of using human vessels to spread its influence, the temporary measures various cultures had employed to contain it. When they finished, silence filled the parlor, broken only by the drumming of rain against the windows and the occasional rumble of thunder. Alejandro's face had grown grave, while Maria crossed herself repeatedly, murmuring prayers under her breath. This thing, Alejandro finally said, it wants Michael. Sarah nodded miserably. It speaks to him, shows him visions. Michael, who had been examining Elizabeth Woodward's journal with unsettling intensity, looked up. Not just me, he said. It wants all of us, a family of vessels, like the copies it made in our house. Elena, who had been silent throughout the explanation, suddenly stood. The symbols Michael has been drawing, they're in the journal too. Look. She pointed to a page where Elizabeth had meticulously copied various incarnations of the symbols, noting their appearances throughout history. She calls them binding sigils, Elena continued, a new urgency in her voice. Used not just to contain the entity, but to control it. The Navajo medicine men, the Spanish priests, even Joseph Woodward, they all used the symbols to establish boundaries the entity couldn't cross. Manuel leaned forward, hope kindling for the first time since their escape. You think we could use them to protect ourselves? To keep it away from Michael? Elena nodded. The journal says the sigils must be drawn in specific patterns, using materials that hold significance to those seeking protection. Blood, Michael said flatly. It has to be blood, like Mama used on the pendant. Sarah recoiled from the suggestion, but Elizabeth's journal confirmed Michael's assertion. Page after page detailed rituals involving blood sacrifice, usually animals. Occasionally the practitioner's own blood freely given. The entity fed on fear and pain. Willing sacrifice disrupted its influence. There has to be another way, Sarah insisted. Catherine, who had been quietly examining one of Michael's drawings, spoke up in her small, clear voice. It's afraid of us. That's why it follows. It's afraid we know how to trap it again. The adults stared at the youngest Márquez's child, startled by her insight. Catherine continued, unperturbed by their attention. The bad thing wants us to be scared. When we're scared, it's stronger. When we're brave, it gets smaller. From the mouths of children, Maria murmured, crossing herself again. Outside, lightning flashed once more, but the figure beneath the street lamp had vanished. Michael went rigid, his eyes widening. "It's coming," he whispered. "It's inside the house." A terrible stillness fell over the room, broken by the distant sound of the front door opening and closing. Footsteps echoed in the entrance hall, measured, unhurried, inexorable. Alejandro moved to the parlor door, positioning himself protectively before his family. Manuel joined him, though both men knew their physical presence offered little defense against what approached. The footsteps stopped outside the parlor. The door handle turned slowly, the mechanism clicking with deliberate precision. As the door swung open, the entity that had followed them from Utah stood, revealed, still wearing the form of the unremarkable man in the black coat, still bearing that unsettling smile that never reached its bottomless eyes. The Márquez family, it said, its voice carrying the same unnatural resonance they had heard on the train, and the Vasquez cousins. "How convenient to find you all together." Its gaze moved to Elizabeth Woodward's journal in Sarah's hands. "Ah." Elizabeth continues her husband's futile work, I see. "What do you want?" Manuel demanded, though they all knew the answer. The entity tilted its head, considering the question as if it were a philosophical puzzle. "Want? Such a limited concept. I exist. I expand. I experience through vessels capable of containing fragments of my awareness." Its gaze shifted to Michael. "The boy has potential beyond any vessel I've encountered in centuries." Sarah stepped in front of her son protectively. "You can't have him," the entity's smile widened. "I already do, Sarah Márquez. From the moment he entered the cellar, a piece of me has resided within him, as it does in you and your husband and your daughters. Small fragments, sleeping but present." Catherine moved forward suddenly, slipping past her mother's restraining hand. She stood before the entity, tiny and defiant. "You're lying," she said with childish directness. "You can't get inside us unless we let you." The entity's composure faltered for the first time, its features rippling like water disturbed by a stone. It recovered quickly, but all had seen the momentary uncertainty. "Catherine speaks the truth," Elena said, joining her sister. "The journal says you can only possess those who invite you through greed, ambition, or fear. Joseph Woodward invited me," the entity acknowledged, as did Manuel Márquez when he opened the box, ignoring his wife's warnings. Curiosity is such a reliable human weakness. Manuel flinched at the accusation, but stood his ground. "I've made my mistakes, but my family has not invited you, nor will they." The entity's gaze moved from face to face, assessing. "Perhaps not today, but I am patient. I have existed for millennia, waiting for suitable vessels. I can wait longer. Or you can be bound again," Sarah said, holding up Elizabeth Woodward's journal. "As you were beneath our home, as you have been countless times throughout history." For the first time, true emotion crossed the entity's borrowed features, a flicker of ancient rage quickly suppressed. "Temporary inconveniences. The binding never lasts. Someone always comes searching, digging, calling to me across the void. Then we'll bind you again," Michael said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been since Utah, "and we'll make sure no one finds you this time." The entity laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "You? A child? You could not comprehend the rituals required. The price demanded." "But I could," came a new voice from behind the entity. Elizabeth Woodward stood in the entrance hall, leaning on a cane but radiating a fierce determination that belied her years. In her free hand she held a cloth-wrapped bundle that emanated a soft blue glow. The entity spun to face her, its human disguise slipping further, the face elongating, the fingers extending into claw-like appendages. Elizabeth had hissed, still meddling after all these decades. "Still binding what should remain bound," she corrected, stepping forward. "My husband gave his life to contain you. I've spent my life ensuring his sacrifice wasn't in vain." She unwrapped the bundle, revealing a stone tablet covered in the same symbols as the pendant, glowing with an inner light that caused the entity to recoil. "Navajo sandstone," Elizabeth explained to the transfixed families. "Carved by medicine men who encountered this creature 4 centuries ago. Passed down through generations of guardians until it reached Joseph." The entity retreated as Elizabeth advanced, the glowing tablet held before her like a shield. "You cannot bind me again," it snarled, its voice distorting, losing its human quality. "There is no vessel prepared, no willing sacrifice." "There is," Michael said, stepping forward despite his parents' attempts to hold him back. "Me? No," Sarah cried, clutching at her son. "Michael, you don't understand what you're saying." "I do, Mama," Michael replied with eerie calmness. I've seen what it showed Joseph Woodward. I know what has to be done. Elizabeth Woodward looked at the boy with newfound respect. The ritual requires a willing vessel to act as bait to draw the entity into a prepared container. Joseph used himself, binding the entity to his own life force, trapping it beneath your home until his heart finally gave out in 1897. And you think I would allow this child to do the same? Sarah asked incredulously. Elizabeth shook her head. Not as Joseph did. We've learned from his mistakes. The binding can be temporary, just long enough to secure the entity in a more permanent prison. Outside, the storm reached its crescendo, wind howling around the eaves of the house, rain lashing against the windows with renewed fury. The entity's form continued to degrade, its human disguise falling away to reveal glimpses of something ancient and terrible beneath a darkness that seemed to absorb the room's light, a shape that defied human comprehension. You have nothing, it roared, its voice now a cacophony of discordant tones. No prepared vessel, no sacred ground, no circle of protection. Elizabeth smiled grimly. You're wrong. She tapped her cane on the floor, and the sound resonated with unexpected depth. This house stands on land blessed by Navajo elders a century ago, one of 7 sites I've maintained throughout the country. Joseph and I planned for your eventual escape. We created a network of prisons, just waiting for your return. The entity's rage manifested physically, the lights in the parlor exploding in showers of glass, furniture sliding across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. The Márquez and Vasquez families huddled together, watching in horror and awe as Elizabeth Woodward stood firm against the supernatural onslaught. Manuel, Elizabeth called over the chaos. The pendant? Quickly, Manuel withdrew the tarnished silver disc from his pocket. Though it appeared inert, lifeless, Elizabeth's tablet caused it to resonate, the faded symbols briefly illuminating. The binding ritual requires both anchor points, Elizabeth explained hurriedly. The tablet to contain, the pendant to direct. She looked at Michael with grave eyes. Are you certain, child? Once begun, this cannot be undone. Michael nodded, his young face set with determination beyond his years. I'm sure. It has to end. Sarah clutched her son's shoulders, tears streaming down her face. Michael, please. It's all right, Mama, he reassured her. I won't be like Mr. Woodward. I won't let it take me forever. Just long enough to trap it. The entity's formless shape roiled and twisted, attempting to escape through the doorway, but Elizabeth raised the tablet higher, the glowing symbols creating a barrier it could not cross. Now, Manuel, place the pendant on the boy's heart. Manuel hesitated, torn between Elizabeth's urgency and his wife's despair. In that moment of indecision, Elena stepped forward, taking the pendant from her father's hand. Not Michael, she said firmly. Me. Before anyone could stop her, Elena pressed the pendant against her chest, directly over her heart. The tarnished silver flared with sudden brilliance, the symbols burning with renewed purpose. Elena gasped, her body going rigid. Elena, Sarah screamed, lunging for her daughter. Elizabeth blocked her path. Don't break the connection. The transfer has begun. The entity howled, a sound of ancient fury and dawning realization. Its amorphous form twisted violently, then began to stretch toward Elena, drawn by the pendant's pull. The air between them distorted, reality itself seeming to bend as the creature was inexorably pulled toward the girl. Elena remained upright, her eyes wide but determined as the entity's essence streamed into the pendant against her chest. Her skin grew pale, veins darkening beneath the surface, but her gaze never wavered. How do we complete the binding? Manuel demanded over the entity's inhuman wails. Elizabeth thrust the tablet into his hands. Place this against the pendant. When they touch, recite the final phrase from the journal, page 73. Sarah had already found the page, her finger tracing the handwritten words there. As Manuel pressed the glowing tablet against the pendant on Elena's chest, Sarah read aloud, Lo que una vez estuvo atado, quedará atado. Lo que una vez fue salado, quedará salado, por el sacrificio libremente dado, por la sangre libremente derramada, te ordeno, regresa al vacío. What once was bound shall be bound. What once was sealed shall be sealed. By the sacrifice freely given, by the blood freely shed, I command you, return to the void. A blinding flash erupted where tablet met pendant, sending everyone staggering backward. When their vision cleared, Elena stood swaying but intact, the pendant now embedded in the tablet's surface, its symbols aligned with those carved in the stone. The entity was gone. In its place, a profound silence filled the room, broken only by the diminishing storm outside and the family's ragged breathing. Elena looked at her parents with tired eyes. It's contained, she said softly. Not forever, but long enough. Elizabeth Woodward approached. taking the fused tablet and pendant from Elena's hands. The stone felt unnaturally heavy, as if it contained more than just physical matter. The symbols on its surface pulsed once more before settling into a dormant state, the glow fading to a barely perceptible shimmer. "You have shown extraordinary courage," Elizabeth told Elena, her voice gentle with understanding. "Few adults would willingly face what you have confronted." Elena swayed slightly, her face pale but composed. "I saw what I wanted from Michael. I couldn't let that happen." Sarah embraced her daughter, tears flowing freely now. "Why, Elena? Why did you put yourself at risk instead?" "Because I'm stronger," Elena replied simply. "I've been hearing its whispers since we found the box, but I never answered. It couldn't get inside me like it did with Michael." Manuel joined the embrace, holding his wife and daughter as if afraid they might vanish. "Is it truly contained?" he asked Elizabeth over their shoulders. The elderly woman nodded gravely. "For now. But as I told you, there is no permanent solution. The binding must be renewed periodically, and the tablet kept in a place of power." "What does that mean for Elena?" Sarah asked, fear evident in her voice. "Your daughter served as a conduit, not a permanent vessel," Elizabeth explained. "Unlike my Joseph, she will not be bound to the entity for life. However," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "she has touched something ancient and powerful. Such contact leaves marks on the soul." Michael approached his sister cautiously, as if seeing her in a new light. "You'll have the dreams now," he said with certainty. "Like I did. But you'll know they're not real." Elena ruffled her brother's hair, a gesture of normalcy in the aftermath of chaos. "I can handle bad dreams, Hermanito." Catherine, who had been clinging to Maria throughout the confrontation, finally released her aunt and moved to her family. "Is the bad thing gone?" she asked, her young voice hopeful yet wary. "Not gone," Elizabeth answered truthfully, "but contained where it cannot harm you or anyone else as long as the tablet remains secure." Alejandro, who had witnessed the entire supernatural encounter with remarkable composure, finally spoke. "And where would such a place be?" "Surely not in my home." Elizabeth managed a weary smile. "No, Señor Vasquez. Your family has faced enough peril. The tablet must be taken to a prepared location, a sacred site where the boundary between worlds is naturally strengthened. There are several such places across the continent, maintained by those who understand what we face. The Navajo Reservation," Manuel guessed. Elizabeth nodded. "Among others. I have contacts guardians who have preserved this knowledge for generations. They will ensure the tablet is properly secured and the binding regularly renewed." "Then it's over?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope. "This chapter, yes," Elizabeth confirmed. "Though I fear your family's connection to this entity may not be so easily severed. It has ... marked you. All of you." The implications of her words hung heavy in the room. Outside, the storm had finally subsided, leaving behind a preternatural stillness. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the windows to illuminate the destruction within the parlor, overturned furniture, shattered glass, and the lingering sense of something ancient and terrible that had briefly touched their lives. "What do we do now?" Manuel asked, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. Elizabeth Woodward straightened her shoulders, suddenly appearing more scholar than frail elderly woman. "First, I take the tablet to those who can protect it. Then," she regarded the Márquez family thoughtfully, "you must decide whether to run from this knowledge or embrace the responsibility it brings." "What responsibility?" Sarah asked wearily. "To remember," Elizabeth replied simply. "To recognize the signs should the entity find its way back into our world. To pass down the warnings to future generations." She placed a gnarled hand on Elena's shoulder. "Your daughter has demonstrated an uncommon resilience against its influence. Such resistance is rare and valuable." Elena looked up at her parents, a new determination in her eyes. "I want to learn. Everything you know, Dr. Woodward. About the entity, about the binding rituals. About all of it." Sarah began to protest, but Manuel stopped her with a gentle touch. "Elena is right, mi amor. Knowledge is our only defense against this thing. Ignorance nearly destroyed us." 3 days later, the Márquez family stood on the train platform once more, this time bidding farewell to Elizabeth Woodward. The tablet, securely wrapped and locked in a specially constructed case, would travel with her to the southwest, where guardians awaited its arrival. "You're certain you won't come with me?" Elizabeth asked Elena. "I could teach you so much more." The girl glanced at her family, her mother's worried face, her father's quiet support, her siblings' dependence, and shook her head. "Not now. My family needs me. But I'll continue studying what you've taught me. And someday, ... Double quotes. Elizabeth nodded in understanding. "The journal is yours now. Use it wisely." She turned to Manuel and Sarah. "Your daughter has a gift. Her connection to the entity, however brief, has opened pathways of understanding most humans never glimpse. In time, she may become a guardian herself. As the train pulled away from the station, the Márquez family stood together on the platform, forever changed by their encounter with forces beyond human comprehension. The entity was contained, not destroyed, not defeated, but bound once more in its endless cycle of imprisonment and escape. "What will we do now, Papa?" Michael asked as they watched the train disappear into the distance. Manuel looked at his family, Sarah, whose courage had never faltered, Elena, who had willingly faced darkness to save her brother, Michael, slowly recovering from the entity's influence, and Catherine, whose innocent insight had revealed truth when adults could not see it. "We rebuild," he said firmly. "We learn. We remember. And we protect each other, always." Sarah took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Where will we go?" Manuel gazed westward toward the setting sun. California, perhaps, far from Utah and its memories. He smiled at his children. A new beginning. As they left the station, Elena felt a momentary chill, a whisper of awareness brushing against her consciousness. She paused, looking back down the empty tracks. For an instant, she thought she saw a tall figure in a black coat watching from the shadows, its face expressionless, its eyes bottomless. Then she blinked, and it was gone. Elena touched the journal in her bag, feeling its weight, the responsibility it represented. Whatever connection remained between her family and the entity, she would be ready. The Márquez legacy had been forever altered, their bloodline now entwined with ancient forces most would never comprehend. "Elena?" Catherine called, waiting with the others at the station exit. "Are you coming?" Elena turned away from the tracks, joining her family with a smile that betrayed none of her inner resolve. "Yes," she said, "I'm coming." As they walked into the bright Denver afternoon, the journal's presence remained a constant reminder. Some mysteries, once uncovered, could never be forgotten. The cellar of the Márquez homestead had collapsed, burying its secrets beneath Utah's soil. But the knowledge they had gained, the terrible truth of what existed in the spaces between worlds, would remain with them always. The hunger that walks between worlds was bound once more, but somewhere in the darkness beyond human perception it waited, patient, eternal, watching.